The last time that I preached to an invisible congregation was when I was a little boy, preaching in my grandmother's yard to my invisible congregation, using the doghouse as my pulpit. The difference between then and now is, first of all, I can read, and this pulpit is much better than the doghouse. But most importantly, our congregation, Spirit of the Cross, is real and fully alive. And while we cannot be physically together, we are certainly with each other in spirit and in the love of the Lord. And again, I just got to be honest, it is strange preaching under these circumstances. Time after time, over the years, we have seen God work through the lectionary. That 3-year cycle of scriptures that covers most of the Bible and all of its major stories. And the lectionary passages are chosen years and even decades ahead. And yet, time after time, we see the evidence of the Holy Spirit at work. The psalm, get this, the psalm for the fourth Sunday of Lent is Psalm 23. I cannot imagine better timing. Psalm 23 is comfort for our souls. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23 is the one psalm that nearly everyone knows, or at least they are familiar with, if for no other reason than it is used in nearly every funeral or graveside service. And that's well, and that's good, and that's proper. For Psalm 23 does bring us comfort in the time of death, and it does bring relief and strength to the family and the friends that are left behind. But something that I want us to remember today is that the psalm in Psalm 23 was not written by a dead person. Psalm 23 is a psalm for the living. And in fact, if we want to get down to it, Psalm 23 is a prayer for when you are scared out of your wits. And if that is you today, there is no better prayer to pray right now. In the midst of this coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic, let's be honest, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of panic. And we are flying blind. We are in uncharted waters. And it is uncharted waters for everyone, from businesses to healthcare systems, to schools, to families, to churches. I don't believe there is a segment of our daily lives that isn't affected by this pandemic. And none of us have had to live like this before. For goodness sakes, I have never pre-recorded a sermon on a Saturday afternoon to be played on Sunday during church time because we are not meeting together, because it would be a threat to each other's health. Never done that before. I can't even remember when no visitors were allowed at the hospital or at the nursing homes. When we are in uncharted waters, and when we don't understand what is happening, and when we don't know what to do because of the confusing and inconsistent instructions that we have been given, when you put all of this together, it can be very scary. And that is exactly where Psalm 23 comes to our rescue. Psalm 23 is a psalm of trust. And trust psalms are spoken in the midst of a crisis, whether it is the coronavirus or any other crisis that you may be facing in your personal life. Trust psalms are meant to be prayed in the time of crisis. And Psalm 23, the best known of them, speaks to us when we are metaphorically in the darkest of valleys and surrounded by fears and enemies and foes. And it reminds us that we can trust God's presence and God's deliverance. Though I may feel lost as a clueless sheep, the Lord is my shepherd, and I lack nothing. Though I feel as lost as a clueless sheep, the Lord makes me to lie down. You might think that that's kind of strange to say, but let me give you a little background to it. The Hebrew verb that is used for the phrase, makes me lie down, speaks of a specialized skill for making animals do so. Now, many animals can lay down on their own. For instance, lions will lay down. They are secured. They are satisfied. They are lions. But sheep cannot do that. Sheep can only lie down in the presence of a shepherd. It is a specialized skill that only the shepherd has. A better translation of what the Hebrew is trying to convey is this: God causes me to lie down, satisfied and secure, relaxed, at ease in the comfort and security of God's presence. God causes me to lie down, satisfied and secure, relaxed, at ease, because of God's wise, devoted, and constant provision. Making sheep lie down is something that only the shepherd can do. And then the psalm deals with this: though I feel like life is being drained from me, Though I feel like that, it is the shepherd that gives me my life back. Jewish commentary points out that even though the phrase, "He restores my soul," is certainly time-honored, but the Hebrew word used actually does not mean soul as we use it today, or in the way that we use it today. Robert Alter comments in his translation of the Hebrew Bible, quote, "It is an image of someone who has almost stopped breathing and is revived." Sort of like, and here's a way to look at it, that when we are scared to death, it is the shepherd that revives. It is the shepherd that gives life back. Though I walk through the shadow of the darkest valley. Probably the most classic line in the psalm, other than the very first sentence. Though I walk through the shadow of the darkest of valleys, I fear no evil. A better translation of that would be, though I walk through the shadow of the darkest of valleys, I fear no harm. Why can we feel or fear no harm? Because you, God, you are with me. Your rod and your staff, again, images of a shepherd. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me, they console me. And there's a couple of things that I want to mention about walking through the shadows of the darkest valleys. First little thing that I want us to remember about walking through the shadows of the dark valleys is that we must remember that that shadow may be a reality today, but there is a greater reality that we must not and cannot forget. And what is that greater reality? Shadows cannot exist without light. So if you find yourself walking in the shadow of a dark valley, no matter what that shadow may be in your life, let this psalm remind us that the shadow itself, the existence of the shadow itself, is proof that the light is also present. And who is our light? Of course, Jesus. And didn't Jesus say that I am the light of the world? And John reminds us in the opening lines of his gospel that the darkness cannot and will not ever extinguish the light. COVID-19 or any other dark crisis cannot and will not overcome the light of Christ, nor can it ever overcome the light that is in the family of God. So if you find yourself today scared because you are walking through the shadow of a dark valley, remind yourself and allow Psalm 23 to remind you that Jesus, our shepherd and our light, is near. Because a shadow cannot exist without light being around. And the second thing that I want us to remember about walking through the shadow of a dark valley is that wise shepherds always lead their sheep on paths that they know. Only a foolish shepherd would ever take their flock into and through an unknown valley. Let's be honest. in a lot of the dark valleys that we face, we don't know what is around the corner. We don't know what is ahead of us. And certainly in this pandemic that we are facing, we don't know what is around the corner, and it scares us to death because we don't know. But let Psalm 23 remind us that we have a shepherd who knows the way, and in fact is the way. And let's remember that the darkest valley that we find ourselves in, no matter what that dark valley is, that dark valleys are not our home. Our shepherd will always lead us through those valleys. We, as the people of God and the sheep of his flock, we never stay in the valley. We pass through them. When I preached on Psalm 23 about 3 years ago, I pointed out that there is one letter that changes the word though into the word through. And of course, that is the letter R. And in that sermon, I shared a sign that will help us to remember that even though we find ourselves in the shadow of the darkest of valleys, that God will get us through. And that sign that I shared is crossed fingers. Now, I know what crossed fingers mean today. We use crossed fingers as a symbol of hoping for good luck. But did you know that in American Sign Language, the letter R, that one letter that changes though into through, that the letter R is made by crossing your middle finger over your index finger. But yet, there's more. Crossed fingers have a history in sign language that certainly predates American Sign Language. Did you know that in the first century, when Christianity was illegal and Christians were being persecuted, now you talk about a dark valley, there it is, but in the first century when Christians were walking through those dark valleys of persecution, believers found ways to communicate their faith and identity in subtle ways. You've got the sign of the fish. Everybody's familiar with that. That's one of the earliest secret signs of Christianity to identify ourselves. The Chi-Rho is another very, very early sign that Christianity used. And another secret sign was the crossed fingers. Some Christians would greet each other by flashing this secret sign language, these crossed fingers, signifying that they were people of the cross. So, when you see someone crossing their fingers, or when you cross your fingers, remember that it is Christians who invented the sign of crossed fingers, and it had nothing to do with luck, and it had everything to do with trust in God. And using it in the context of Psalm 23, crossed fingers can remind us that no matter the dark valley that we face, that we have a shepherd who has gone through the dark valley ahead of us. And that shepherd knows the way. Even though we face a variety of fears and anxieties and uncertainties, We have a shepherd who will add the R to that though, and that shepherd will get us through. As one commentator wrote, and I quote that commentator, "The aim of Psalm 23 is to make the language of trust available to God's people, so that these words that confess trust in God will be words that can be spoken in the midst of their daily lives, especially when they are in crosses." And that, my sisters and brothers, that's exactly where we're at in a crisis. Pray Psalm 23. Pray Psalm 23. It's why God gave it to us for such a time as this. Pray Psalm 23 and remember that we have a shepherd that will get us through. And God's people said, Amen.